Welcome to the STEM Confidence Podcast, where we talk about how to turn your data into powerful insights. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the STEM Confidence Podcast. In this episode, I want to cover a topic that is very important for all of us who are constantly explaining our work, whether in verbal or written format. And that is how to properly give feedback. Giving feedback is not a trivial task, especially if you really want to help the person who is asking for feedback. Therefore, in this episode, I want to discuss the way we deliver feedback, because we all know that even though we have something useful to say, the way we say it is also very important. Because at the end of the day, we all want our feedback to result in action. So when you Google how to give good feedback, it says that good feedback shouldn't be indirect or soft, so that the other person doesn't even realize they are getting feedback. But also, it shouldn't be too direct, because we don't want the other person to feel threatened by our advice. One of the most common methods to deliver feedback is the so-called sandwich method, which consists of starting with some positive feedback and stating what you liked, then continuing with some negative feedback, and finally wrapping it all up with a positive aspect. In general, the advice is to keep the scale in balance, meaning that there should be an equal part of positive and negative feedback. While this method is really useful to give sort of the outline of the feedback giving process, what I usually miss when listening to people giving feedback, whether to me or to other colleagues, is the way in which feedback is delivered. And this is why I want to share with you 4 points to take into account whenever you are giving feedback. The first one is to always ask for permission to give feedback. This one is super important, and I see it happening all the time. People just start giving you feedback assuming that this is something you were expecting. To make the situation more comfortable, it is much better to start with asking for permission. By doing so, you let the other person know that they have a choice to accept or deny your feedback. You could say, for example, "Thank you for your talk. Do you have some time to chat? I would like to share some ideas with you." And this will allow the other person to choose whether they want to be given feedback right away, or they prefer to listen to it later or not at all. Secondly, once you got permission of the speaker, you can start using the sandwich method, which means starting with something good, continuing with something less good, and wrapping up with something good again. This part is the most important. You can think of it as sort of the nucleus of your feedback giving process. Here, it is very important to be very clear, very specific, and avoid using blur words. Blur words are essentially words that mean different things to different people. For example, instead of saying, "This graph is not very clear," which sounds quite vague, you could say, "I believe this graph would be much clearer if you added a few more data points." Do you see the difference between the two examples? The second version tells the person what is the problem and what could be a possible solution and why it is needed. Next, you want to make sure that you use an impact statement. This means that you add the meaning to your specific feedback. For example, you could say, "I really like this figure. It helped me understand your point and follow better what was coming next." Again, this not only adds clarity to your feedback, but it also provides context about why this specific figure was helpful for you. These kinds of statements give the person information on how to design other figures and what they should be taking into account in the future. And finally, I always try to wrap up my feedback with a question. For example, I like to ask, what do you think about it? I believe that doing so really helps to give power to the other person, in a way that they still feel it's their work and their choice to accept the feedback or not. Also, it turns the conversation into a dialogue rather than a monologue. To wrap up, I want to remind you that anyone could give feedback. But giving good and useful feedback that creates impact is really a form of art. So, next time someone asks you for feedback, make sure that you are clear, concise, and specific. Thank you for listening, and until next time. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you are ready to elevate your communication skills and transform your data into valuable insights, schedule a free discovery call on the link in the description.